dive into sort of a brief introduction of the Snowplow tech first, then how we are set up at Snowplow in terms of our engineering. And then I'll dive into one of our repositories and give you a quick run through how we structure things from an open source point of view, as you'll quickly see how we do quite a lot of open source work. So Snowplow at its heart really is all about building a behavioral data asset for a company. And we've believed for a long time now that building this sort of asset is really important for a lot of organizations. And I think we see, as we go into the future, that we're going to want to give less and less away to the big organizations, your Facebooks and your Googles, and we're going to want to maintain control of that data asset ourselves as our own organizations. So what do we mean when we talk about behavioral data asset? Well, throughout all of your systems that you use, whether it be your mobile apps, your websites, your server and all the logic that runs there, maybe emails, your marketing things, all of those generate sort of your users doing things on your platform. All of these generate events, and then we build this data asset based on those core events. Those core events, they'll have properties attached, and there might be some common context as well that applies across all of these different events, and they lead to a whole host of use cases that you can support once you start building your own data asset. And so what does it look like from a Snowplow point of view? So it gets a little bit more complicated. So on the left-hand side here, we have a set of Snowplow, what we call trackers, and you can deploy these across a whole range of platforms, from your mobile web, server side, as I've already mentioned, pixel trackers for emails, and we can also integrate with third-party things via webhooks. And they all share a common protocol, which goes into this core Snowplow pipeline. The core part really of the pipeline is this validation and enrich step. So all of the events you send from these trackers, they're schemaed, so they all get validated as part of this initial step in the pipeline. This makes sure that all the data that eventually lands in your warehouse is of a really high quality, and it's exactly what you expected it to be. So if there's ever anything strange going on down here, maybe there's a bot on your website, and maybe there's a malformed request being sent, maybe there's some dodgy implementation in terms of one of your trackers, that'll never hit the data warehouse. And that instead gets logged to a thing we call failed events. So you can monitor and keep a track of what's going on. But you only ever get this good high quality data landing in your warehouse or your data lake or your real-time stream. We then also enrich this data. So we take various pieces of information and we add extra context into that event. So that might be working out like what browser and what operating system the event came from. It might be going off and calling a third-party API to go and add more information to it. It might be running some custom JavaScript to work something out in real time as the event gets processed. And all of that extra enrichment information gets loaded into the warehouse as well. All of this is really scalable and really resilient. And the whole point here is there's there's basically no data loss once an event hits the collector on the edge of this purple box in the center. And then once it's in the warehouse, that's where you can then deal with all of those different use cases that you might want depending on where your data is. So that core part, that's all open source. So this is a Snowplow open source part. This is where I spend most of my time as an engineer. And we're sort of very proudly open source. We invest a lot of our engineering effort into this open source engine to power data pipelines. And you can take that right now and you can spin one up, and that's where we'll dive in at the end of this talk. But on top of that, and underneath it, I suppose, I'll show you what I mean in a second by that, we also have something called Snowplow Insights. And this is our management platform. This makes using Snowplow a little bit easier. Not only do we set it up and manage it for you, but we also add like a layer on top of that, which helps you manage those schemas, how your pipeline's configured, and when your data modeling jobs execute, all those sorts of things. It removes some of the challenges around doing that. So as we break it down a little bit more, and that core open source bit, this is basically that part. So you've got the collection, validation, and enrich that I've already described in the failed events. We also then write it to a real-time stream. So we're very cloud focused. So we are predominantly using Kinesis in AWS and PubSub in GCP as the two different real-time streams, depending on which cloud platform you deploy Snowplow into. You can then write additional consumers on this real-time stream. So if you've got real-time use cases, you can do them there. We then write that stream directly into a data lake, so S3 or GCP, GCS, Google Cloud Storage. And then we take, as depending on the platform, this diagram's partly true. If it's on as AWS, then we'll take the data lake and we'll load that then into the warehouse. If you're on GCP, we basically go straight from the real-time stream into BigQuery, and we use something called streaming inserts to write to BigQuery. And then we have a whole host of open source data models that allow you to model that raw data. We call that the atomic data. We imagine that as like an immutable data store, something that never really changes. And we then have these models which turn it into very common aggregations that people want to use. So for instance, on the web, you might have something like page view aggregations, session aggregations, and user level aggregations. So things like how many times has this user visited this website? It'd be a user level aggregation. Page view aggregation might be how long was the user on this page? How far did they scroll down the page? Things like that, that our trackers right back at the beginning will be tracking. And then then when we come to the non-open source bit, this is where the platform management sort of comes in. So we fully manage the Snowplow stack. What's different about this isn't typical software as a service. We don't own this infrastructure. We deploy it into your own cloud account. So you typically create a sub account inside of your cloud, and you give Snowplow, the Snowplow analytics team, access to that. And we deploy and manage Snowplow inside of your cloud account. This means it's a completely first-party setup. You put your own domain name on it. You completely own the whole thing. You can turn it down, turn it off whenever you want. You own that asset. We don't have any access to that. We just manage it, and it's all automated. So all of this is done with Terraform, ultimately, Kubernetes on GCP, and soon AWS. And yeah, so we're basically taking control of that in terms of all the help and setup there, all the complex scheduling that needs to happen to load into the warehouse. And then there's also support teams to help you more deeply understand how to get the most value out of your Snowplow pipeline. So we split Snowplow into these three layers now. We call them BDM, BDE, and BDF. And we call Snowplow collectively a BDP. Apparently, we really like acronyms now. So the open source bit is this BDE bit in the middle, this core part of Snowplow. This is where the diagram I've showed you that you can just sort of see there, where we go through that collection, validation, enrichment, and then loading it into the warehouse. That's the engine, as well as all the trackers. They're all open source. This deployment, this data fabric, this is the deployment. So all of that automation around the deployment, all the Terraform, all of the monitoring, scaling, all of that stuff that's part of that BDF. That's a core part of what we build as an engineering team to ensure that deploying Snowplow, when you're using Snowplow Insights, is as seamless as possible. And we also think of things like SLAs and such around uptime and things like that. And then we have a UI which sits on top of the engine, which helps you with configuring it. Typically, you can do everything that the UI and the API offers you on an open source from an open source pipeline. But being able to click on a website and upload your schemas and get some validation in there to make sure that they're right and they make sense. Monitor your jobs that are running, all those data modeling jobs, and restart them if they failed. Do an ad hoc run if you want to, without having to figure out how the API works of the server or the orchestration tool that you use. That makes it a little bit easier to have that extra layer. So this behavioral data engine is open source, and this is the repo I'll start in a second. We'll dive into here. This is where we solve those core challenges and all those compliance challenges as well. And we see it's broken down here into 5 distinct parts, which is what how we typically think of a Snowplow pipeline. So the trackers, collectors, enrichment, and validation happens as part of the enrichment, the storage tier, and then the data modeling tier. And by going to Snowplow on GitHub, you basically get access to the whole world of Snowplow that you need to be able to set up a Snowplow pipeline. And it's a good jump off spot. So there's not really any code in Snowplow. There used to be, and there's not anymore. It's basically a jump off point now into the rest of our open source repositories, of which there are many, many open source repositories. The behavioral data fabric that I've mentioned, this is the tech for managing the infrastructure that sits underneath that. So this is what we're referring to as private SaaS. So every single client that we have has a dedicated set of infrastructure. So we're managing hundreds of Snowplow pipelines And to do that, we need to make sure it's all automated and it's all very easy for us to monitor and maintain that. Of those hundreds of Snowplow pipelines, we have a technical operations team of 5 people, globally distributed, and we have a support team of, I think, 6 or 7 people, right, to manage those hundreds of pipelines. So it's important that these things work really well, and that they give us that kind of assurance and that level of monitoring and automation to be able to achieve what we do. And then there's a behavioral data management, which helps you, and this is the UI, you can see. This helps the people that are using Snowplow every day to get more out of that experience once they've got their Snowplow pipeline up and running. So how do we do all of this with an engineering team? Well, there's 21 of us in our engineering team at Snowplow, and we're split across these 3 different layers. So we've actually broken our teams down so that we very much focus on different parts of this layer. So the behavioral data management has 2 teams, and data workflow is the main one, I think, that they build that UI that I've just shown you. And then we have a team called product-led growth. There's a new experience now called Try Snowplow. It makes Snowplow really easy to set up and just run like a trial experience for 30 days. And they build out this trial experience, which has got some management and some recipes to help you get going and understand Snowplow a little bit more. There's the data capability team, which is part of the engine. They build the core pipeline. So from the collector to the loading to the warehouse, that's what the data capability team work on. And the data value team, they work on the edges of the Snowplow pipeline. So the trackers and the data models. And we also have a couple of relays that relay that data into other platforms, like into Kafka and things like that. And then there's our technical operations team, which build out that data fabric. And they built it in such a way that when the behavioral data engine teams build different parts and different components or upgrades, that we can edit that Terraform. We're empowered to go from the code all the way to rollout and ensuring that we're building all those parts that are needed to get that Snowplow pipeline into production. So to break it down, management tools in data workflow, the Try Snowplow experience in the product-led growth team, data capability, the core pipeline, data value trackers and data models, and the technical operations team are worried about the deployment and the scalability of the pipeline. So our teams are very flat. Each team has between 4 and 6 engineers, except for the product-led growth team, which is a little bit smaller at the moment. And then one of those engineers has this extra responsibility as a delivery lead. I guess you could really call them a team lead, maybe in a more traditional setup. And their role is not to like give people work, but more to make sure that everything's humming and is working as the way we expect it to be working. So it's just an extra responsibility rather than an explicit like leveling within the team. And we also have a number of coaches. Often the delivery leads are the coaches. And the idea in here is every engineer has a coach associated to them. And that just gives you somebody else, someone outside of your engineering team. So your coach will always be from another engineering team, just to bat ideas around with, to talk to, just another peer that you're sort of, you've got this like relationship with to help you throughout your career, whatever question it might be, but from a more coaching / mentoring sort of side of things. And really, we really try and make it as a productive and empowered environment as we can from an engineering point of view. Like I said, there's no real leadership within the teams. It's very flat. So you make your own choices, you make your own decisions, but you've got this sort of network, delivery leads and coaches to use to help you make the right decisions. And to, when you're making like maybe a choice that impacts how the open source pipeline is set up, you might want to bounce some ideas around to get some different opinions, because that can have quite a big impact. So you've got that network around you within Snowplow. So let's dive into Snowplow really quickly. And let's see if this works. Hopefully you can all see this. So this is where the magic happens, I guess. And this is the homepage of Snowplow. So here, there's the link off to the different parts of our estate. And you can also see quite a lot of information here to get going. So we have a version compatibility matrix. This helps you understand which parts of the Snowplow pipeline work together from an API compatibility point of view. It's typically pretty compatible all the way through, but I think quite interesting to just get some clarity on that. We have a public roadmap, so you can see what's coming up and what we're working on right now at Snowplow. That covers our Insights product and our open source product. We have links off to our Try Snowplow and commercial offering, and then we have that diagram that I've just shown you today. and then you can see it all broken down. So from a tracker point of view, a whole host of platforms. Collector and enricher, sort of generally you'd run them on like an EC2 instance or something like that, and you'd have them scaling. And then you've got your various loaders into the different warehouses. We have some testing tools, Mini and Micro. Micro is a Docker image, and Mini is like a more fully fledged pipeline in a box. And then we have some what we call analytics SDKs, which help you work with the real-time stream if you want to work with those. We also run an open source discourse, and as an engineer, it's a place where I live. So I hang out on our discourse and I help other engineers who are trying to spin up a Snowplow pipeline. I help them set it up, help them with their tracking questions, help them with their modeling questions. And there's a whole host of interesting information there as well. And then we have a couple of Twitter places you can keep an eye out as well. So I'm out of time. I'm getting on a bit. So the thing I mainly maintain these days is the JavaScript tracker, which is one of our most popular trackers. And we've recently just rebuilt this so that it now isn't just a traditional web-based tracker that loads maybe through a snippet in GTM, but can also now be directly embedded in your application as an NPM package. So we've taken a newer, like a slightly different approach, perhaps. A lot of analytics tools, you load them via like Google Tag Manager or something, and that still works. We've still got this tag-based solution. But we now also, when people are building modern React apps, Angular apps, things like that, you want to directly embed that first-class tracking into your platform. So now we're helping people do that and going another step with our new tracker that's based on NPM as well. This is also a mono repository, so there's a brand new plugin architecture where you can build your own plugins. It's been really fun sort of being able to rethink and rebuild this and sort of pick all the latest tools, but still maintain, quite interestingly, some crazy browser support. So we still support IE9, and we do that because our tracker needs to be we need to work on the lowest common denominator to make, you need to know if you're running the Snowplow tracker on your website, are people visiting my website on Internet Explorer still? And if they are, maybe we still need to support it as an organization. So that's where we need to make sure that we're supporting a really wide range. So we have a lot of automated tests to make sure it all works. We use our own technology to do this. So we use Snowplow Micro to validate the tracking in our automated tests. So we have like a little test rig that spins up every time we do a commit, and it fires a whole host of events into a Snowplow Micro and then validates that the events arrive into Snowplow Micro and validate as we would expect. So please feel free to go to Snowplow, have a little look around. The main pipeline is built in Scala, and then obviously the trackers are built in a whole host of languages, and data modeling is predominantly SQL across all those different warehouses in a variety of different dialects. So that's about it from me today. We've obviously got plenty of jobs. We're growing very quickly. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from everybody.